Hello, YouTube, Lorcana community, Sapphire Steel friends. I am very excited to do this video today. I am joined by a very good friend of mine, Lorcana Justice, who I linked up on Twitter a few months ago. And he's a very smart player, not just with Sapphire Steel, but the way he understands the game. And we have been pretty much talking again for the past 3 4 months, like every day, talking about Sapphire Steel. We were talking about the deck for his run for his LCQ because he went to the EU Continentals, and as well as my LCQ run since I was headed to the NA Continentals. And we were pretty much just talking about Sapphire Steel and trying to, I don't want to say perfect the list, but understanding where it needs to be in the meta and what's the best way for it to be played. And as you guys can see, from this past weekend, if you follow me on social media or my other videos, I was able to secure my LCQ win after 5 rounds with Sapphire Steel with a very spicy list that me and Justice cooked up pretty much the day before the event. We'll get all into that, but go ahead and just say if you want to say anything to introduce yourself, Mr. Justice.
Yeah, thanks, man. So I'm a longtime card game player, fairly new to Lorcana, but love it a lot. And Blue Steel has been sort of my home in the game since I picked it up during Set 4. And I reached out to Rip like during maybe like 2 months ago to really talk about Imperial Bow. And then from there, we just snowballed into this whole thing of like every single little decision on this deck, right? Do we play wheel or no wheel? How do we play our uninkables? Which of like, are we on locations? Do we keep dime in here? All these little pieces, I think, built up into actually landing on this deck list like right at the last minute and having that be correct and having found what I think, even after the event, feels like what might be so close to like the set six end of format blue steel list that's ready to like crack it open and go win some set champs.
Yeah, I agree. You pretty much said it perfectly well. How we started off with Imperial Bow, and we ended up on the list that we landed at. And when you went to your LCQ, unfortunately, with the Sapphire Steel list that we had made, you did get knocked out round one, but thankfully you were able to get to a PM slot, and you still got through your LCQ with red blue. So it's still Sapphire Steel, you just red. So again, congrats to you, man. That was very awesome. How did you feel winning your LCQ?
Honestly, it was a real rush and a great experience. I attended the last two European DLCs this year, and I did not so great at my first one and slightly better at the second, but I really felt like I didn't get a chance to put everything I'd learned
Hmm.
over like the 6 months of playing into practice and actually show some results for it. And so to actually show up at that LCQ, even after like blowing it in the morning with some not so great last minute changes on the blue steel list, to then I made last minute changes in the afternoon as well, but for the right reasons that time,
Hmm.
and it paid off. Right, I had a stellar run. I went 10 wins, 1 loss game record in my LCQ run,
Correct.
and to sort of do that felt like even more than just making it.
Hmm.
The run itself and getting through it like that was such a reassurance that everything I thought I'd learned and everything that I wanted to try coming together in that sort of perfect moment was a reassurance that's like all the hard work does pay off, right? That
Yes.
it's every lesson learned, every sort of minor optimization, every card decision does have an impact.
Hmm.
And then to see it come together in the end and get through that LCQ was just like the success of the year, right? That
Hmm.
getting the welcome to the ballroom promo is a trophy that I'm going to keep for a very long time.
This list that you see here on the screen was created, if I'm not mistaken. I flew out on Thursday and it was made Wednesday, so probably the day before I flew out. Me and Justice had been pretty much working on New World for the longest time, and as the days got closer, he basically just told me like, "What are you not liking in your testing?" And the main thing was just bricky hands, uninkables, and like New World not being as impactful as it was at the start of the set. And we pivoted into No New World with Chicha, and we tried Chicha out for a bit. and Chicha is a very strong card into a Ruby meta. But for me personally, and I guess Justice too, like we just found it's a very strong card for Ruby. Like there's no debate over that. It's just going to an LCQ, I expected there to be like not just red, like I could face anything. And if I'm going to face potentially anything, I don't think Chicha was the move there. And it's crazy because like if you're gonna play No New World, you need to have like your high arm engine, visions, and then usually have like a third engine, which would be like the Chicha. But in this list, we took out the Chicha and we put in the Sad Beast. So before we just get into the list one by one, I think that really shows how we saw the meta and we understood what cards would be the right play. And even though this list was created pretty much the day before the event, because me and Justice, I had gone over like, hey, we're gonna run this Chicha build with small gym, but we were I don't know how. I guess together we were just like, that's not the play. And then you had the awesome idea with adding in those manners that we'll get to. But it was just really crazy how like we didn't need to do any testing with the deck this list because all the testing was already done. All the theory crafting, the deck building, we just made this list a day before, and we knew it would work. What are your thoughts on how like we just like I just took the list that we made pretty much with zero testing?
Yeah, I think as you said it right, like when you have enough reps on this deck,
Mm-hmm.
even you play world, you play no world, you change your tools, you can carry a lot of those learnings into changes of the list. And sometimes, it doesn't really change.
Mm-hmm.
If you have that experience, you can still pilot the deck just as well. And, it was really interesting that sort of final week of testing and crafting, right? That I think you asked me like early on in the week, like, what is Cogsworth doing for us? And like, do we really need this Cogsworth?
Yes.
And that's, I think, what started sort of the final version of getting us on this list, right? Is that we cut the Cogsworth.
Mm-hmm.
And we were looking at like what other cards can we play in that 5-drop slot to get more value. And so Donald was the first card, 5-drop in that slot that was, all right, how about we play a card that gets us a card for free as an ink, and then lets us sort of raise that tempo a little bit. And then we go to like our 7-drop slots, right? Play the Simba, play the Arthur we were looking at the time. And we tested that a little bit, and it was like, okay, this Donald's not doing anything. You always ink him. He's not actually like drawing us cards, which is really what we want. And then we came back to like, why not just play the Beast, right? Play this card that is in a vacuum, right? It doesn't get answered when it doesn't get answered by Medusa, the Beast just like goes crazy, right? Into any deck that's not Steel, this card just sits there and starts drawing you cards. And so the Beast came in, the Manor came in, and all of a sudden, like, it just clicked into place, right? That it found like we had the missing pieces and it all fell in, and it just covered everything, right? And it was, I think, a really good call for the LCQ because, the locations bring a varied threat to that, and they're super unexpected. And so going into, 5 rounds best of 3, you really get a chance to decide like, okay, is now the time for the Manor?
Yes, exactly.
Do you ink it? Do you play it? Do you maybe hold it for game 2, right? As like a surprise factor card. And, and then people also play around the cards you're not playing, right? People assume that maybe the Cogsworth is going to come down. Maybe they don't worry about that.
No World.
And then when you just don't play it, right? No World, it just, you get like so much value from playing something slightly unexpected. And I think we really had that edge for this list going into the LCQ.
Yeah, I mean, you pretty much said it spot on. I think the biggest thing, how you said right, was like just a surprise factor of like manners. Same thing with the Sad Beast, and then like not playing a whole new world. People already get surprised when you're playing Sapphire Steel, and then you add that on top. They're gonna think you're playing New World, and then you're not playing New World. So I definitely do think that had a lot of success to it. All right, so to start off with our low ground characters, we're playing 2 Captain Hook and 2 Calhoun with 4 Smies. Now, Hook is a card that I really wanted to play something on turn 1 that wasn't a popsicle. I think for the LCQ, one of the big things was like I did not want to lose to aggro, hyper aggro. I know a lot of people did take hyper aggro, and we do kind of have a good matchup into that, but I just didn't want to take any risk. And I believe that Hook just paired really well with Smee against Red Blue as well to get any lore. And I just like the fact that Hook on the draw is just very, very strong, just because you can, again, counter any aggro decks. It can help out with daisies, pretty much kill any of the purple cards. Same thing with Calhoun. I had talked to Justice the night before again, and we were on small gym, and I was just saying like, hey, you know what? I think we need to just play like the best cards in Steel right now, which are going to be like P and Calhoun. And I think Calhoun contests the board like overkill. And again, on the draw is very strong. And yeah, it was a best of three format, so I could take it to game three. But my main goal was still trying to win on the draw a lot. I believe that you weren't too fond of Calhoun at first, but once we talked about it more, you were like, okay, this is a good meta call for it, especially for our deck, since I know a lot of Sapphire and Steel players are not using Calhoun. Um, the nice thing about the list was like we got it down to 14 uninks, which is pretty crazy. And then the four Smees, I mean, pretty standard. Smee's just the best two drop in the game. But I think what stands out the most is the Hook and Calhoun. And these cards pretty much were just played like every game in the LCQ. Maybe not Hook every game, but Calhoun came out pretty much almost every game. And I love seeing her in my opening hand just to contest the board. I really do like this low to the ground package. What are your thoughts on these choices that we made for just to the low to the ground aspect?
Yep. So actually, the card that like really that captures for me is the Hook. The Hook
Mm-hmm.
is such a like love it hate it card
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
in that it is our best turn one play into aggro that's not just cannons,
Mm-hmm.
something that dies to it, right? The daisy is the problem where it's like
Mm-hmm.
getting that hook down, or like just the purple Diablo or even the broom. The Hook does all of this,
Mm-hmm.
and even if it's such a low value card outside of that, having just that turn one tempo board play in a deck like this that combos out so quickly in the end buys you so much time
Mm-hmm.
for coming down on that first turn. And the Calhoun is a card that I love, that I would play probably like four of in a
Mm-hmm.
heartbeat if it wasn't bad
Uninkable.
into our sort of worst matchup
Mm-hmm.
and being uninkable. And if our uninkable counts weren't so high. So like Calhoun
Yes.
is a card that I've often tried to keep like a third copy of in the deck, and sometimes find that like I can't quite justify having
Mm-hmm.
one more uninkable two drop that like you really do want to keep blind,
Mm-hmm.
but that has such downside into red blue.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but I think the combination of like the Hook, Calhoun, Smee, and cannons gives us that perfect early coverage, right? That depending on whether we're going first or we're going second, we can either, skip the item, play the item, and then play the two, play the item, sail, play the hook or the
Yes.
cannons if we need it, or like sail, ink the hook when we see that we don't need it. So there's so many scenarios where like that little 1-2 package just covers everything, right? And then the
Mm-hmm.
sail again, you can go like Calhoun or Smee first, sail, and then play another one, the other one that you keep, right? If you keep
Mm-hmm.
Calhoun, Smee, and sail in your opening hand, you can sort of test the waters, play the Smee first or the Calhoun's first if that's what you need, and then keep the Smee in case you do need to ink him off the sail. You draw enough inkables, you throw the Smee down as well. You've won the board at that point, and you've ramped, and then you go like right into your. You can go into Sad Beast at that point, or you can go into like Hiram +1,
Mm-hmm.
and it just gives you like nearly limitless options for controlling the board. And so, no matter how your blue steel build is looking right now, I think the combination of Smee, Hook, Cannons, and a two drop, whether it's Calhoun or Jim,
Mm-hmm.
is really like a must have package in
Yes.
any of the like world or no world blue steel lists.
Yeah, I agree because when you mentioned like a lot of people have this misconception of like, well, Hook only trades for one body, or Hook's only killing one thing. The point of Hook isn't to necessarily control the board. Kind of the same thing with like when we're like trying to combat the daisies. I'm not trying to completely shut them down turn one, turn two. I'm just trying to slow them down. As long as you can slow them down, even if it's by one, like one or two lore, Hook did its job and the value was there, like you don't see it early game, but when it comes down to it late game, you notice the lore difference. You're like, oh wow, if I didn't get rid of that body turn one, turn two, the game would have been different. So I think having these options as a early board contest just to slow the game down is the best way to go. And I really do like it really did just come up the whole weekend. The hooks, me Calhoun, very awesome package. All right, hold on. Let me put
Yep,
a
I
pause.
think it's easy to.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
No, you're good. Okay, you're good. All right, so let me just say that. Okay, so you can. I'm gonna edit that and then say what you're gonna say. So go ahead.
yeah. And I think it's easy to miss the opportunity cost that you get when you play that one drop, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not just that it challenges something on turn one, it's that your opponent has to then spend time answering it. And that snowball effect runs throughout the game, right? It's not even always just like saving you one or two lore. Sometimes actually it's like, okay, then they couldn't play a better card on three because they foxed one of their units to kill the hook for value. And if we're blue steel, we end the game with like aerial dime for 10.
Mm-hmm.
So one lore for us early
It's a
or one
lot.
lore for our opponent early does not have the same value as denying it to them, right? So we're
Yes.
really happy to give up a little bit of our early, like progressing our combo because it's so much more powerful late, right? Denying our opponents one or two lore by killing their one or two drop
Mm-hmm.
is huge for us.
Yeah, so I do highly suggest everyone to make sure you have like a low to the ground package in your deck. We'll see how this ratios goes moving forward. But yeah, I love the package. I'm glad that we put it in last minute and definitely paid off because I played against green purple, I played against red decks, red purple, so it definitely came up. And then we have the three Pete. I think no brainer. Well, I guess we see a lot of European players play like one Pete. I guess it's just not as popular over there. But here in the States, we have a lot of amber steel, we have a lot of red purple, so we have a lot of different things where Pete can come up. And I think Pete is Sapphire Steel's best three drop. It's really our only three drop play outside of Fishbone Quill. Pete is super strong into Steel Song, into Steel decks, which did come up in my last round in the LCQ that we'll get into later, but. Pete, just an overall strong card, just to counter against red decks. I think the thing with Pete is though is do you want to run two or three? I think three was fine for where we landed at for LCQ, just to feel safe. Going forward, not sure how this ratio would change, but yeah, Pete is just a good card. I know you were really just on me about it because you knew that red blue was going to be a very popular deck.
Yep, I disagree with a lot of the other blue steel players on this one in that I think Pete should be like a four of by
Mm-hmm.
default, and I'm conceding to three on space problems.
Mm-hmm.
But actually, like, if you want to play blue steel and not play like blue red, you're really only doing it for two reasons: the early game control pieces and Pete. Pete is a reason in and of himself to play steel as a color, and I think he's good into almost everything, right? A big thing in stateside is you guys have green steel. You're the home of Zansaed. And Pete gives us,
True.
like you're saying, the only other like turn three play that we actually kind of want to make against that deck. And so, it gives us, they play Ursula Deceiver of All, and they're going to get ready to discard our hand next turn. And we just get to go, like, hey, I don't have to ramp and drop my own resources. You don't quest very fast. I'm just going to play this Pete, stop you getting like Sing or Prince John value right away, play my Hiram on turn four, refill my hand. And by that point, you basically can't be discarded down to zero.
Yes.
And they have an incredibly hard time, like, efficiently answering that Hiram unless they happen to have like double Sing strength,
Mm-hmm.
which means they're not discarding you. And then you can, if we're still on Cogsworth, that's when you can sort of follow on with the Cogsworth,
Or
but
Tinkerbell, and they
or
waste the
just play the
strength.
grab your
Yeah.
swords,
Mm-hmm.
right? Yeah, if you got to five. And so Pete gives us lines into green steel that we wouldn't have otherwise, and into red purple, steel song, and red blue. The Pete is just like an absolute game breaker
Mm-hmm.
if you get it at the right time, right? Same with the Hiram. They go aerial, you play the Pete, you maybe get your Fishbone Quill down. After that, you've got things on board to contest with. They're going to have a harder time questing them when they can't sing. You get to ramp before they world you. You're golden. Red purple, they go to their V prep turn. You don't necessarily want to commit anything else bigger on board. You put your Pete down, you get your value. Same with red blue, right? Shark, Maui Shark is more popular now than ever, and a lot of the best red blue builds are playing four of them. And the Pete just sits there and stops them gaining lead lore burst. And it's part of our, it's part of the Pete Ariel Exodia combo for this deck, right? You get to 9 ink, you play Pete Ariel the next turn, you play the Dime, you Dime tap the Ariel, you quest her for 5, you gain 10 lore burst. And that really means if we're on 10 lore, we're threatening lethal with a 3-card combo that's pretty easy for us to assemble in the non-world list, right? Where we're not getting rid of those resources. So, I mean, I think Pete is kind of the secret MVP of Blue Steel, right? I think if the people who are on 1 Pete, 2 Pete, especially the New World players, where they're going to like discard or lose some of those Petes, or if they see them early, they're not going to have them. I think Pete's an easy 3 of. And again, right, if I could find extra space in this deck somewhere, I'd probably be playing a 4th Pete over a lot of other cards.
Yeah, it's interesting because when I was looking at Sky's list and Bad Vegas list, they weren't on Pete. They didn't think Pete was needed for No New World. They just said we're just going all gas every turn. So I do think it's very interesting, the different perspectives that we all have on the card. But I think me and you can just we pretty much agreed that Pete was just a strong card.
Yeah.
So going forward with Pete, we'll just go over the Hiram package: 4 Hirams, 4 Popsicles, 4 Fortispheres. Nothing really to be said there. Very standard. Arguably one of the best draw packages, if not the best draw package in the game. Broken card. And then we have the very spicy tech that a lot of the Sapphire Steel players called us crazy for the people who knew what we were doing behind the scenes. Again, we're not playing Chicha. We're not playing New World. We ended up on Tragic Beast 5-drop. So we took out the Cogsworth. I had told Justice, and he kind of reacted at first like, you're crazy. But again, shout out to the boys for Sapphire Steel, the other Sapphire Steel boys. They were just not on Cogs. They had told me, like, I don't think Cogs is doing that much. And I kind of thought about it, and it was interesting. And I was like, well, we're not really playing songs anymore. And Calhoun has resist. Like, what does the deck need for me to for the deck to find that missing piece? And then that's when you had said, okay, well, why don't we play Tragic Beast? It's a 5-drop on curve against red purple, red blue. It can get 1 or 2 cards, and then that's when we also were like, wait a minute, aren't these decks dropping Medusa? And that's when we were like, okay, this is definitely the way to go. And I can honestly say that Sad Beast did get me a lot of draws this weekend. A lot of people were not able to remove him. I just want to say against Ed, shout out to Ed for winning the whole event. I was able to play him round 2 of the event. Unfortunately, I lost to my own misplace. He got me on the 0-2. Definitely should have been a 1-1, but when I played the Beast, he made a face. Like, he just made a funny face, and I knew it was the kind of face like, are you like...
He's got no Medusa in his
like,
list.
You have nothing to answer. Like, there's no way you have nothing to answer this Beast. And 4 turns passed by, and that Beast just stood still. And then later finding out, not playing Elsa's, wasn't playing Medusa's. So that was just funny. The Sad Beast definitely came up a lot. Very strong card. And I'm glad you had brought it up, because it was a very popular card when No New World first came out. And then after Chicha came out, it just slowly fell off. A lot of people think that Chicha was just a better card. But I think being able to replace Chicha with Calhoun and that uninkable slot to fight the board more, and we didn't lose Chicha because we got her back in an inkable slot with Tragic Beast. Again, shout out to you for like mentioning it right away when I had dropped the Cogs. What was your thought process on that, other than just like it's like another 5-drop body?
Yeah, so replacing the Cogsworth slot was part of it. And like you said, we dropped our song count a lot in the sort of non-world build here. And I think, a lot of people really like Chicha. And I actually think Chicha, especially in No World, is actually conflicting with a lot of what we want to do, because she's contesting our 2-drop slot, which we really want that Calhoun or that Smee. She's uninkable. And I think critically, a lot of people think like, hey, if your Chicha sticks around, you get like repeated value, you get a draw every turn. But you have to ink 2 cards every turn to get that draw. And the thing I find is that once I've ramped twice max in this deck, I actually value every card in my hand more most of the time than I would just like another draw from my deck. And so I don't necessarily want to like keep ramping. I think this is different in world lists, where you kind of wouldn't play her to begin with because the world gives you that massive refill, right? World, you want to ramp you want to ink twice every turn with Fishbone Quill, and you just want to go to like crazy numbers, right? I played a game in testing where I did like a Tamatoa double dime turn to go from 0 to 20 in a single turn,
Mm-hmm.
and you can do that on New World, but you can't do that in No World. And
Mm-hmm.
the Chicha, to just get one card, you got to ink twice. She's bad on curve into everything that's not like red, blue, red, purple. The Beast, he's a 5/3 that quests for 2. He's got they either have to respect him immediately and answer him, or he's going to draw you a card. And then, critically, the thing he does that Cogsworth doesn't, Cogsworth can't trade. Not
Exactly.
well,
Can't quest either.
right? Every now and then, exactly. Whereas the Beast, if he survives that turn, he hasn't taken any damage. He's drawn you a card. He's replaced himself. You're up 1, and then you have like a 3/5 attacker on board. Is actually good into a lot of things. He quests for
Mm-hmm.
2. He just does a little bit of everything,
Trades
and he's
two for
inkable.
and
And
trades two
so,
for one.
yeah, even better into the lower range decks that have to put like some damage into
Like
him, and then all of a
yeah.
sudden he's big enough to start threatening locations. Right? He's great when he does that. And so he just felt like he smoothed out our 4, 5, 6 line, and if he ever gets you like one draw, you're happy. And without the Medusas being relevant in the meta, or when we ramp into him before our opponents can get to Medusa, he's going to guarantee us one draw into like most Ruby matchups. And
Mm-hmm.
then if he can do a second one, or if he starts questing after that, in my mind, like that's way better than Chicha or
Yeah.
anything else that's sort of inkable, right? He's really our only other card that we tested Tala a bit,
Oh yeah.
right? We were looking at, are we happy enough to just get like our choice of whatever card? And the 3/3 costs 4, quest for 1, just not quite good enough, right? That 5 health, that 2 lore, those are big stats on this beast. And if he draws you even a second card, sometimes he's one of the craziest cards in this list.
Yeah, this card was awesome. I think moving forward, we're keeping him in the list. Now at that point, it's just a factor ratio 2 to 3. But yeah, this card was definitely awesome. Came up a lot, and I'm glad that we ran it. After Beast, you can see that we're playing Ariel. We won't go into too much details into Ariel. Should just be Ariel has Ward, can quest for 5, close out your red matches, red blue, red purple. Very awesome card. We just decided to go with 2 instead of 3, just to lower down the uninked count, and I think it worked out pretty well. After the Ariel, we go on to 4 Tinkerbell. Pretty standard. Again, a card that's in every Sapphire Steel list, contested board, super strong card. Definitely came up a lot. Now we have the spicy cards. We're gonna get a little more spicy. Before we get into the spicy cards, we'll just get rid of the other character. 3 Tamatoas. We didn't play the 4th Tamatoa, so we can balance out the other 2 big cards. But Tamatoa, very strong card. Same thing with Ariel, closes out red decks. Just a very beefy crab that you can get out on turn 5, 6 into these decks. But now the spicy cards. Spicy cards. We got 2 Hades and 2 Simbas. Now, you don't usually play these cards in whole New Worlds list because you replace them with like Let It Go, and then you have like for Hades, and then your New World replaces the Simba. When you're playing no New World, these cards are amazing because you want to be doing tempo plays. You want to be able to just quest with all your guys and then just be playing big bodies. And in some scenarios, playing a Tamatoa is not impacting the board, especially on the draw in some cases. So you need cards that do something back. And the fact that Hades and Simba, Hades getting rid of one target, and then Simba being able to put 2 damage on something like a Tinkerbell effect, and also able to draw cards, and does it again on play and on challenge. These 2 cards are phenomenal. Definitely MVPs of the weekend. Hades is just able to counteract with Pete. My last round in the LCQ, I had a Simba on board, and my opponent tanks for a long time, and he chose not to quest, and he played a Pete, and I smiled in my head because I had a Hades in my hand since like turn 4, and I just drew a card, slapped down that Hades, got rid of his only singer on the board, and that pretty much won me the game. Also very strong into red blue. I was able to get a 2-0 in my main event in the day 2, being able and day 1, sorry, being able to Hades away at Tamatoa on the draw. Definitely my opponent did not expect it. And then Simba just being again very strong with being able to filter cards, dealing ping damage, and then having that 5/7 stat line is crazy. Every time he was on the board, against Ed too. When I went into Beast into Simba, he was just like, yeah, I'm not getting rid of these two big bodies. Just very strong cards to your opponent to deal with. The only downside of Simba is there wasn't a chance to where it had damage on my opponent was able to crash into him and he had damage on him, and it was against green purple. And if he top decked Go-Go or if he had Go-Go, would have lost. Fortunately, he didn't have it. That's probably the only thing about Simba, but we have popsicles for that. But I think these two cards were awesome. The only other card we were testing was Arthur, and the other Sapphire Steel guys on No New World were on one Arthur. They were on one Hades and one Arthur. You pretty much said kind of the same thing that they said, where you really only need to see Hades once. But I don't know. I just think Hades is just so strong to where you like yes, you only want to see him once, but I want to make sure I see him. Arthur, a very strong card to play too. It was just really hard for me to add him in. But yeah, we settled on these 2/7 drops, and I know Justice did have some thoughts on Arthur. So, what do you think on how we ended up on just these 2/2 split?
So Simba, like one of my favorite cards in the game to play.
Mm-hmm.
I'm always like trying to get to Simba in my blue steel lists, maybe even in like New World if I can.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, God, like big shout out to Arthur. I was testing two Arthur, and I loved it. Right, two Arthur, four tank, two Simba just gives you such control into every board based deck, and even unlocks like really interesting surprise turns. Like if you have a tank on board, your blue opponents are just going to go like, okay, I can play Hiram here, and then you hit him with the Arthur, and the tank kills the upright Hiram,
Mm-hmm.
and you've developed like a three quester, and those blowouts are great. But the problem is he needs something else on board,
Mm-hmm.
and I didn't want to play like 1-1. I think like if there's a space where we could play two Arthur and two Let It Go to cover the role of the Hades, I think maybe that'd be really nice.
Mm-hmm.
But we couldn't really fit like four uninkable 7 drops in this list. That just doesn't, it's just going to ruin our consistency.
Mm-hmm.
And the Hades is good on his own.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
And that was a big criteria for us in the deck building thing, right? Was that we didn't want cards, right? Like the bow that are not good on their own.
Yeah.
That could
Exactly.
be a liability in like a bad draw. And so the Hades, on the play, on the draw, doesn't really matter. You get the right moment to like slam the Hades down when your opponent's trying to develop like one threat or has kind of like half committed to the board, and he just swings it like completely back in your favor.
Mm-hmm.
And again, with like less Medusa in the format than ever, he's actually like doesn't just necessarily get counter traded by them playing that. The Hades often just like removes a key threat and then has, a good trading body on board that also quests for two.
2 for 1. They got a 2 for 1 it if they want to kill it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think those slots were awesome, and I'm glad that I ran them, and they were definitely MVPs of the weekend. So yeah, so that goes over all the characters in the deck, and now we'll go over the action cards, and we'll start off with our two Fire the Cannons. So Fire the Cannons, very, very, very strong card. We wanted to make sure that we had a turn one play, like how I had mentioned to Justice, like we need to have a turn one play, and you were very adamant on, okay, fire the cannons, three fire the cannons. And so we were gonna go three fire the cannons, but I last minute I had told them, okay, well, what if I just cut one, add in the hook, and then we just found space to add in the second one. And to me, that felt very solid. Having four different options as a turn one play to counteract the board. And then again, you can play sell, and if you're on the play, let's say you go popsicle turn one, you play sell. I mean, you go popsicle and then they go daisy. Oh, you're like, oh, okay, cool. It's a good thing I didn't ink this hook. I can play sell, play the hook. Same thing, play sell, play the fire the cannons. Fire the cannons, Simba, Tinkerbell swords are all ping damage. So we do have these answers to Genie or any evasive threats. The ping damage comes up the most. And I think the most important card for the fire the cannons to counteract with is Flynn. So I think two was fine. I could definitely see an argument where you want to play three, but then you have the hook. So I think we're kind of on the right track of having the hook Calhoun cannons. And maybe there's a world where we just don't need the third cannons. But I did like two. It was awesome. And that's pretty much the only thing there is to that, other than if you want to run two or three. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
So I think it's worth kind of noting that the ratio of ping removal that you settled on for this list was two cannons, two Zeus, two swords.
Too simple.
And part of what goes into that actually is, yeah, Simba as well. But that there's like a real sweet spot in blue steel where it's like 6 swords cannons, right? 3-3
Yes.
is like a classic ratio that is proven with time. And I was like a big pusher for the Zeus. I think the Zeus is just like an all around fantastic card right now. And we
Mm-hmm.
couldn't decide before the event, like, is there a correct 3-3 that might not be cannon swords to really good for scenarios where like cannons is bad, like red blue, which is a matchup that was always like every single choice in my mind was like,
Mm-hmm.
is this bad into red blue? Can we cut it? Can we reduce it? And we looked at, like changing the ratio of Calhoun and cannons and finding that sweet spot. But like you said, the biggest concern for me is red purple and that Flynn Rider. And that Calhoun and Smee, they check it, they don't let him like trigger for a turn.
Then
But
Sisu.
if our opponent, can follow with the Sisu or like Fox bounce that one drop and just leave it upright,
True.
you haven't actually dealt with the Flynn problem. And so the more that I've thought about this, the more I keep coming back to like, there's a reason we're on 3 cannons because the cannons actually solves our problem cards, right? It
Yes.
removes things from the board that we need to. A small Cindy that's going to shift next turn, a Merfolk that like hasn't quested on turn 1, a Bonsai that's come down, 2 extra damage on Genie with that swords. And so the cannons really is like an actual answer to things. And the fact that it weaves with the sail gives us like a turn 2 ramp plus cannons, the
Crazy. Very true.
Merfolk, and then follow up with the Hiram is just like, it's one of the reasons why we're the absolute bane of like green purple. That should be like a 2-0 for us like almost every time. The one card that we didn't really talk about that we did a lot of testing and playing with was Twin Fire.
Oh yes, Fire.
The
Correct.
Twin Fire, like such a good card. I love what it does for the deck. I love the option to like hit 2, but not being a 1 was a problem.
Yeah, and
And
uninkable.
yeah, there's a world where I would be happy to play like 3 cannons, 3 twin, no swords. But every time I try and cut the swords back, I get punished for it.
Yep.
And the swords is just, it's too good. And then the same way you go the way around, you try and play like swords and twin, and then you miss the fact that
Fire the
cannons
twin.
cost 1 sometimes.
Yes.
And there's some high roll scenarios, right? You hit like a Chernobyls and a Flynn that your opponent didn't banish the Chernobyls when they hit the Flynn. You hit both of those with the Twin Fire, or you hit like Merfolk Bonsai, or you hit Cinderella Lilo. Those are all like insane high roll scenarios where that Twin Fire all of a sudden becomes the best card in the deck. But it's bad into red blue.
Yes, very bad.
And that was an issue. And even then, the fact that it's like just a little bit more expensive meant that there was a lot of scenarios where it also wasn't quite good enough for like swords plus twin
Everything
to kill
else. Yeah.
Genie. And so it didn't make the cut, but I think we'll come back around to it eventually, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like there's a moment somewhere
There's
where
a
I think
world.
Twin Fire will be the card you want in this list. And it's probably just in like a slightly more aggressive meta. People keep calling this an aggro meta. I don't really believe it with 30% red blue share at both like NA and European continentals. I think we're in like a red blue meta. But if we were actually back in like a green purple start of set 6 control or aggro meta, I think you'd be on like 3 Twin Fire in this deck super easily, and we'd be like really happy about that.
Yeah, I think the 2 and 3 ratio is pretty much all that's left there to be said about it. I'd recommend people just playing with what you feel. But we landed on 2 just because, again, the 14 uninkable count. I could have easily added that cannons in for the 15, but just for some reason, I was just like, for LCQ specifically, I'm going to play 14 on inks, and I'm glad it paid off. So with the cannons after that, we have Sail the Azurite Sea. We are playing 3 instead of 4. Again, this is, if I'm not mistaken, a 60 card list, so I could have just added in the 4th one, but I figured that, you know what, you really just need to see one sail in this particular list. And I don't know, I just settled for 3. I think 3 is fine. You can definitely play 4. If you're going to play 4, I mean, if you're playing small gym instead of Calhoun, then you definitely want to play 4. But since we went to the Calhoun, I just figured that 3 was fine. I think that's all there is to say about that card as well. Just basically just a 3 or 4 split. And then we're
I
playing.
think
Go ahead.
big note actually
Mm-hmm.
is we were testing Tipo and more on Enkables.
Oh, you're right. You're right. Yes.
And the Tipo is such a bad top deck and brings so little to us and doesn't let you go like play a 2-drop and then sail plus another 2-drop, right? You only get to go like Tipo plus a 1-drop, which is fine if you have cannons or popsicle, but it's kind of bad otherwise. And so we actually worked sort of backwards on the Ininkables to go like, we don't want to play Tipo. We really want to play
So,
the Sail.
hmm
And so how do we get our Ininkables low enough to like let us do that? And three, I think, you know, you could play 61 cards, play the fourth Sail. It's going to increase your odds of finding ramp. It's a
hmm
perfectly okay card to like top deck late game. But, you know, the blue Sail players, they've been doing the math with sort of a reasonable mulligan, right? We want to play Fishbone Quill most of the time.
hmm
And that like four Quill, three of another ramp card is a pretty standard ratio that like blue Steel players have discovered. And I think it just works fine here, right? We don't need the fourth Sail. If we want to keep like an exact 60, try and stay as lean as possible, it's a slot we can cut for like a higher value card or a card that fills a different role.
Yeah, I think 3 was fine. And like you said perfectly, you could run 61 with it if you wanted to. All right, for the next action card, one of my favorite cards in the deck, that's going to be Vision of the Future. I think this card is very standard in No New World lists. I know a lot of people in New World do use this card, maybe not to the extent of 4, but in No New World, how our draw engine is not the same. We want to make sure we're able to find those answers, and I thought 4 Visions was perfect. I know Justice the night before told me that I could run 3 since I'm also playing Sad Beast, but I just really love that card for being an amazing top deck. And we were also thinking about running Develop Your Brain as well, but we just settled on the 4 Visions. What are your thoughts on that, Justice?
Yep. So I loved in like set for Blue Steel. I was actually playing like Develop Your Brain,
Mm-hmm.
which is something that like Justin Morales was doing as well. I actually met him at Bochum and we talked about this because it was super unpopular at the time. But we were both
Mm-hmm.
like, no, this card's great. It like cycles our deck. It helps us find what we need. It smooths out your card. It does everything.
Mm-hmm.
And Visions is like that, but it is your like super search for finding answers or missing pieces, right? So some people they think that Visions is like part of your draw package. It's not really. It helps you find your draw package
Yes.
when your enemy answers the first theorem. Or if you've got all the draw you need, it helps you find like the song or the ping removal that you're missing, or the dime, or just like any other piece. You know, a lot of testing games recently, I've had no items, and so you visions, and you're like, I gotta find this item, I gotta find an item for my hero, and it gets you whatever you're missing. So it does a little bit of everything.
Yeah, this card was awesome. I do recommend if you are going to play No New World to run this card at least 3 copies, 3 or 4. And then to round off the actions, we are going to finish off with our removal cards, and that's going to be 2 Zeus and 2 Swords. So in standard Sapphire Steel list, you usually see 3 Swords. You don't really see Zeus too much in these past sets, but after testing, Justin was, he really likes this card a lot, and he told me you have to run it, you have to run it. And the night before, I was just like, I don't know, I think I want to play the third Swords, maybe an Arthur, but in my testing, he was right. Being able to make your Hiram a little bit more useful in scenarios where he's not, he's able to sing Zeus. I know in this build, we're not really trying to sing too much. We're just pretty much just trying to quest and go. But the Zeus is being able to answer Genie, answer Maui Shark, answer Sisus, pretty much answer anything in the game was very strong. It did come up for me this weekend, and I went with 2 Swords again just to keep it at 60 to keep the unink count at 14. But if I were to play a 15th uninkable, it would definitely prioritize the third Swords over the third Calhoun or the third Cannons. I think Swords is a very strong card, pretty dead into red decks. Luckily for me in this weekend and for my LCQ, Swords didn't really come up a lot, and the 2 scenarios where it would have came up against Green Purple, my opponent Ursula and took it out of my hand, and against Amber Steel in my last round, he peated me, but thankfully I had the Hades to counteract with this board. I think this ratio was fine again for the LCQ specifically. For your local meta, your store champs, you can definitely mess around with those ratios, but being able to have just to make sure I'm covering every lines of offense or whatever my opponent throws at me, these 2 cards were awesome. I'll let Justice talk a little bit more about why he just wanted me to play Zeus.
Yep. I mean, I love Zeus right now. I
Mm-hmm.
think Zeus is a card that answers almost every threat in the meta that we care about answering.
Mm-hmm.
And it gives us some sort of unique lines into even like answering enemy heroes
Mm-hmm.
into red blue, right? And a lot of my red blue testing, I was finding that like not inking Tink and keeping a Zeus in hand meant that like I couldn't just answer the shark, but I could answer a hero as long
Mm-hmm.
as I had somebody to sing that on board and then play the Tink for that extra 6 damage. And that really like the Zeus Hades combo is your gives us coverage into every bit of like removal that we need
Yes.
to. And swords, I hate swords, but there is no like replacement for it.
Mm-mm.
And it is part of the reason that we have good matchups into a lot of the decks that we do, right? Tink plus someone to sing swords is a board wipe even into like red purple, right? That kills basically everything that they could throw down. And the problem is like we just can't cut it. Or maybe we can and we haven't found the way yet. But I hate this card, and I still find myself putting it at 3 in every single list because there's just nothing that does it the same.
It's a necessary evil. Necessary evil.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll see it going forward how those ratios panned out. But for the LCQ, I'm glad I went with these card choices, and I'm glad you told me to keep the Zeus in. And to round off the list, we got the most spiciest iteration tech card. That this card came out of nowhere. You had thrown this idea to me earlier in the season. I was like, no, and then I threw it back at you towards the end. Again, I really just can't stress enough how awesome it was for us to create this list the night before. And on the icing on the cake, you were like, wait a minute. As we were getting down to the last three cards, you were like, what about this card? And that's going to be 3 McDuck Manor, a location into Sapphire Steel deck. This card was played a lot, if I'm not mistaken, when it first came out, because at that time we were just dominating red blue with dime and locations, and there was no hideaway or anything like that. But it fell off, and then I guess it came back. It's been coming back into other decks, and honestly, this card wasn't like extremely to where like it won me the whole weekend, but it did win me where it mattered in my red purple matchups. And then I believe I can't remember what matchup, but I just played a mana down early when I had the chance to, and it stacked me up some lore. It came up, I want to say maybe, let's just say like 30% of the time, which is more than enough. Like that's just the perfect amount where I wanted to see it in the LCQ. And when it came up, my opponents were like, "You play that too?" Like just having all these different tech choices. I think adding the manner was awesome. And I'll just let Justice talk about why he thought it was a good idea in the deck. He convinced me to put it in, and because of him, I put it in. I wouldn't have put it in otherwise.
Yep. So Manor was the secret sauce in my red blue LCQ run as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I think whether people like realize it or not, we are actually in a McDuck Manor meta.
Mm-hmm.
And either you're like 60% of the room is actually just like ignoring that and pretending it's not true. And then the other 40% of the room is either like on McDuck Manor
Mm-hmm.
or is actively thinking about how do I answer this card. And we even see this a little bit with like Amethyst decks maybe starting to come back on locations, right? That at the start of this set, everyone cut their castles, everyone cut their libraries, and it just leaves this void where people stop respecting locations and they don't know how to deal with them and they drop their tech cards for them. We used to play Rise or like Hideaway specifically, and they're gone right now. And so the Manor, I mean, 9 health is
Crazy.
absolutely crazy on this card. It's so hard for like lower mid-range decks to remove. Red purple, they have a kind of hard time unless they have like Fox and Crab specifically. Red blue, they can do some things with Vitasphere if they have it, but not everyone plays it. And this card gives us, it's kind of like our 4th to 6th copy of Pete into Ruby decks.
Mm-hmm.
You're getting to like their B prep turn, and they're getting ready to B prep. They started thinking about B prepping you like a turn ago, and they're committed to it, and they haven't really developed the board.
Mm-hmm.
And you just slam that mana down, or maybe 2 of them if you're at like 8 ink,
Mm-hmm.
and it just wins you the game right there because they cannot answer both your board and the manner before you get enough lore to just like dime out, or even just like play a couple extra things and quest out, right? There, we looked at builds of this list that did not have like aerial or dime in them, and that were really heavy on the McDuck Manor. And it is just, I think, while you can find the space for it, and while the meta that you're going into is slow enough to get the value from it, it's a really great inclusion for us, and it really varies our threat profile.
Mm-hmm.
There are some exceptions to that, right? I think we'll talk about this as we go on to your main event deck list. But I think with Manor, you need to know when you can play it and when you can't. Into like the most aggressive decks, they're just going to ignore it because they're going to win before you get there. But into everything that's not like pure aggro, Manor is even sometimes good as like a turn, like a 4 ink tempo play on curve, because an unanswered like 2 questing location is just going to win you a game by like snowballing. And so even into some decks like Amber Steel or Ruby Amethyst, sometimes like if they have a kind of weakish start and you're not under like Flynn threat, you can play that manner, and they have to change like their whole game plan to actually go like I need to answer this before I start worrying about winning. And it's like the hook. It buys you so much time, right? I had a Steel Song player who had like a Naveem, an Ursula, 2-drop, and like another card on board. And I just played the manor, and he kind of looked at that and turned everything sideways into the manor,
Instead of
not even
questing.
killing it, instead of like questing for 4. And that like probably actually wasn't a great play on his part. He probably should have ignored it. But it makes people,
Play
especially people who aren't
differently.
prepared for it,
Hmm.
play differently and play incorrectly. And so, just changing up what our threats are and making our bad matchups better is such a huge draw for this card, right? Like this into red blue, you can play it on curve if you're on the play and it's super good, and then like follow it up with the Hiram. Or like later on in the game, once they like prep you, then you just slam it down. And by that point in the game, right, they often don't have their Mauis,
Hmm.
or they don't have just like big attack creatures to do it. You can play like a Hiram and the Manor, and outside of maybe like play Big Sisu for 8, which
Hmm.
isn't even like that's only 5 damage into it. They'd still need a rush card next turn. You start guaranteeing yourself like at least 2 lore from this thing. And so then if you can Zeus the Sisu before they
Keep
can
the
swing
mana
into it,
leaking.
you just
Hmm.
have this full health mana on the board, and they can't do anything, right? And then that's where the Zeus and the Hades start to like really work with this thing to protect it, right? They're our
Hmm.
be prepareds. They remove like the one big piece your opponent commits to the board to try and remove this. And then the Amethyst decks, right? If they're going to spend time like crab foxing this, they're using their bounces, they're not challenging your
Not
board, they're
casting
not drawing cards, right? You slow them a
tremendously down.
lot, right? It's they have to spend twice as much ink as mana costs us just to try and remove it,
Hmm.
and that gives us so much time.
Yeah, this card was amazing against my red purple matchup. That I got B prepped, and then I had those two manners in my hand, slammed them down. And I'm glad this card was in the deck. Again, it wasn't something to where like it won me all my matches, but doesn't have to win all my matches. It has to win me the ones where my opponents least expect it. I want to give a huge shout out to the other Sapphire and Steel homies who helped us along the way. To Bad Vegas, to Mr. R&B. Congrats R&B on his top 16 run. And again, shout out to my homie, the Rat DLC Chicago winner for the late night testing. Shout out to the 20 Lore Pro Discord for the Sapphire Steel thread, for just being super supportive of me and for the color, cheering me on as to the event. Those guys are awesome. Shout out to you, Lorcana Justice, for again talking to me every day for the past all these these months, and we got there in the end. And I'm just really happy with the list. I'm happy with the way Sapphire Steel performed. I definitely recommend people trying out this list. It's definitely harder than New World. Like Sapphire Steel is already hard as it is, so it also felt good being able to pilot this deck even at a higher skill level. It just felt awesome. I had an amazing weekend. I'm glad I took Sapphire Steel. Um, any last words or any shout outs that you would like to give?
Yep. It's like you said, it's a hard deck to play, but the more reps you put in, the more you work on it and think about it, like the more rewards you get from playing it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's a list that is infinitely rewarding. I do have some shout outs for Blue Steel guys. Justin Morales,
Oh yes.
meeting him at Bochum was a huge deal for me, and like early refining my play style and getting a grip on like how I wanted to deck build. Din Kang Pham as well, as just like a teacher and someone to speak with and bounce ideas off of has been huge on this. And then to Bun and the Dudley boys, Bun got me into this game. He was like an old time university friend and Yu-Gi-Oh player. So we did that whole circuit until he's like, "Hey, come play Lorcana." Turns out it was the thing I was missing in my life. And the Dudley Boys local. If I didn't have such a great group of players to actually go and meet with every week, right? I don't know if I'd have necessarily stuck around or put as much into this game as I have. So, they all get a shout out there.
Yeah, and that sums it up. Thank you, everyone, for watching. I know for those of you who saw it all the way to the end, um, again, thank you. This Sapphire and Steel deck, again, it's such an awesome color. I'm glad we were able to get there at the end. And I see big things coming for 2025. And I know if it's not me, it's Justice or Justin or whoever, any of the Sapphire Steel boys are gonna get a win next year. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.
Bye, well.